Hi everyone, welcome to Indicio Identity Community Meetup for January 2022. We are very excited to have Gabriel Rene, and our topic is how Web 3.0 will connect humans, machines, and AI to transform the world. Before we get started, we would like to have a few words from Heather Dahl, CEO of Indicio.
Hi, Maya. Thank you. Welcome to everyone. I'm excited to kick off the first of our monthly meetups for 2022. We are moving into our just beyond our second year of providing this type of content to the community. And I think the topics that we tackle and the experts that we bring on bring really intriguing conversations. I want to give a special welcome to anyone who's here and new to our community. It's so cool to see in the chat where everyone's coming from Hamburg to, I heard a shout out from Brussels, Dublin, go Fairfax, Virginia. We have Seattle, Canada. You know, by all means, if you're new to the meetup or you're returning, add your location to the conversation, because I think it's really interesting that we bring together this global community. For those of you who aren't familiar with Indicio, we are a public benefit company, and our mission is to advance decentralized identity. A part of our mission is running educational events like this. And because we're out there building ecosystems for trusted data, today's topic we find really exciting, absolutely provocative, excited to see Gabe here and to talk about the Internet of Everything and what it means for people and digital objects and non-digital objects to provide identity and to communicate with each other in ways that are secure and trustworthy. Ken was supposed to be here today to lead the conversation, but he couldn't make it. And so Indicio Senior Architect Sam Curran, he's here to lead the conversation and interview with our absolutely terrific guest, Gabriel Rene. So thank you all for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Sam.
Thanks, Heather, and thanks, Gabriel, for being here. I guess we should start with an introduction. That's appropriate. Gabriel is the architect of the spatial web. It's a vision he's described with his co-author, Dan Mapes, in the international best-selling book titled The Spatial Web, How Web 3.0 Will Connect Humans, Machines, and AI to Transform the World. He's the executive director at Verses Lab and the Spatial Web Foundation, and he and his team are bringing this vision to life. The groundbreaking hyperspatial markup language is currently being discussed at a new working group at the IEEE. Both Web3 and the Metaverse have been recent hot topics in the last couple of months, but the spatial web is where the real becomes virtual and the virtual real. So welcome to Gabriel Rene.
Thank you so much for having me, Sam. Thank you, Heather. And Ken, when you watch this, hopefully we're doing good work on your behalf. So Sam, thanks for hosting me today, and it's an honor to be here and have a chance to speak to everyone.
Excellent. I've been stunt doubling for Ken in a few areas, and I'm not as good looking as Ken is, but I do my best. So excellent. All right, let's dive into some questions here, and please answer with whatever you think is relevant, and we can take this discussion wherever we need to go. Right. So you've described the spatial web as the Internet of Everything, and you've thought a lot about what the Internet of Everything will look like. What do you see?
Well, the first thing I see is a more holistic approach to the concept of the application of network computing technologies like the Internet. And a lot of times what happens, what tends to occur is that perspectives on emerging technology are industry specific or technology specific. We talk about AI, or we talk about XR, we talk about IoT, or we talk about blockchain, and we talk about quantum, or it's by industry, right? This applies to government, or this applies to supply chain, this applies to retail, and this applies to healthcare. And so these narratives are constantly emerging, where we even have these themes. Human 2.0. We have dialogues around Web 3.0, Industry 4.0. The Japanese are talking about Society 5.0. In all of those cases, almost the exact same set of technologies are being discussed, and it's kind of the usual suspects I just rattled off. some people started talking about the Internet of Things a handful of years ago. This idea that it wasn't just the internet where we had sort of interconnected communications, but rather these physical connected smart devices would be form this new network. And that was very exciting. It remains exciting. We've yet to see a whole lot work. I can tell you that the smart home struggle is real. And interoperability is at the heart of every problem, it seems like. And so this idea that you can connect things is one level. Then there's another debate about things being smart. So at one level, you've got the Internet of Things. And then there's been spatial computing, which has really emerged around this idea that now is being repackaged again into the metaverse narrative, which you might call the Internet of non-things, right? Sort of virtual things that are not things, but they are things, right? And so, and then there's been this idea of the blockchain folks kind of saying the Internet of money or the Internet of trust, right? It sort of starts to intersect with the work that your community is doing. And there's the Internet of Intelligence thing, which was kind of the AI folks' attempt early on. The semantic web, again, whether we kind of use internet or web, or sort of talking variations of this kind of a network where the data is intelligent or smart in and of itself. And then the term smart, which has taken over everything. So we saw a smartphone. That was the first thing. It was just a computer, but it's fine. It's a smartphone. Why? Because it has some connected capability. And in the beginning, smart meant connected. As we've machine learning kind of and deep learning found its footing over the last decade, the idea of things becoming smart meant actually intelligent, the feedback loops, adaptive. Smart home now means that your Nest adjusts the temperature for you, and that the lights turn on and off based on some feedback loop or information. And then, of course, we're talking smart cities. And so we go, smartphones, smart things, smart cars, right? Smart cities. And the idea is that these cities become intelligent, adaptive, right? Your autonomous car is able to just drive because all the lights are, traffic is, this sort of amorphous thing, like a bunch of starlings kind of moving through, and drones and automated functionality, the Amazon Goification of everything. You walk into a store, you take what you want, you walk out. All these sort of smart functions that might be built into government services, right? And all this sort of future sci-fi smart city narratives. But when I spoke to community of smart cities 4 years ago in Europe, 40 cities that came together to kind of explore this, their number one thing was, well, how do we connect with other smart cities? So how do we form a network of smart cities? Well, smart cities with all these smart cars and smartphones and smart devices and smart things with these internet and web connections across these various set of interests and industries forms what you might call a smart world. And that idea that you've got this global cyber physical network now that encompasses all of these things, and that the addressability of an object isn't just that it's connected. It might just be that it's being viewed by a camera. It could be an object that has no internet connection in and of itself, but its network has its own DID, is essentially showing up on the network. That network we call the spatial web. And I'll pause there.
That was really good explanation. So a natural follow-on to that, I realize that Web 3.0 has become kind of a loaded term. You used it kind of first in the title of your book, obviously, so it's recorded there. But it's come to mean some different things in recent time. But using sort of your original meaning of Web 3.0, why doesn't Web 2.0 already solve this? What is missing from what we've got today that we need to go where we need to go?
Well, there's a handful of things, and I think that some of the architects of Web 1.0, if you will, have lamented about some of the infrastructure decisions that were made at the time. Now, there were technical limitations, there were practical limitations. Hardly anyone actually cared, but there were debates around identity and privacy and security. There was a tendency, being academics and scientists, not to think too deeply into all of the societal implications of these technologies. And so the anticipation that people would use this for good and not for personal, selfish, or otherwise harmful ends was the default, right? Oh, it's going to be this awesome network, and we're going to do information sharing. Great, problem solved, right? And decades of work had gone into that, you know, from ARPANET all the way up into to the World Wide Web, where you have Tim Berners-Lee kind of pulling a bunch of threads together and stitching that into what became this backbone of this amazing communications network. But identity was actually one of the real missing ingredients, in my opinion. And that anonymity part, the thing that makes the web open, is also the thing that makes the web dangerous. That the hackers, trackers, and fakers that are permeating our lives, from, you know, simple sort of, you know, issues around misrepresentation, all the way to identity theft, all the way to now ransomware. And we're about one hop away from, you know, from biotech and people being able to hack devices that we're wearing, or that are on our bodies, or that are in our bodies. And so the openness of the web is a double-edged sword that seems to cut both ways. And that allowed the Web 2.0 era organizations and companies to maximize the capital potential of that structure. And so they essentially monetized that openness. That anonymity was a function of the fact that you didn't have an identity. So we'll rent you one. We're Google, how about ours? We're Facebook, here's ours. Apple, here's one for you as well. How about one for LinkedIn and Facebook and blah, 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 blah. Right? So we all run around with these sort of two-dimensional avatars, you know, locked in these digital fiefdoms where we serve certain functions. We get certain services from that. So I don't think that a pure polarized view on this, looking at Web 2.0 as inherently negative, is fair or accurate. But these are major holes in the architecture that allowed for this type of, it allowed, I suppose, capitalism to thrive in a new dimension. And that thriving has compromised some of the inherent freedoms, and some might say human rights, and that's becoming part of the debate. What property do we own here with respect to our data? And I think that those holes have produced, you know, really horrific outcomes, like not just on the monetization side, but on how we are programmed into wanting or thinking certain things. And whether those things are products and services, whether those things are our own ideas about ourselves and our identity and our self-image, or whether it's our viewpoint on effectiveness of vaccines and science and what political representative we think has our best interests. You cannot no longer separate the technical work that we've done here with the web and our societal implications. And that's the real zeitgeist challenge that I think we face at this moment, that requires some new ways of thinking about it.
So you've talked about some architectural adjustments that'll help get us there. One of those pieces of architecture, I think, is the Hyperspatial markup language, HSML, that is part of your work at the IEEE. Can you describe what HSML will help us with?
Yeah, so just one quick parenthetical, and it's a function of a little bit of us copying something. It is HSML, but it's Hyperspatial modeling language instead of markup language. Although there was quite a bit of debate internally about whether that was an accurate description. The function of a markup language and a modeling language are different, but depending on your perspective. So in this case, it is about modeling at the heart of it. How do we model the world digitally in a way that is coherent with the way that humans cognize the world? And I provide that caveat because there are other ways of cognizing the world that we're unable to be aware of, and that is not what our concern is with respect to what we need to teach machines or AIs. We need to ensure that they can cognize the world in a way that is similar or compatible, or at least incorporates our understanding of reality. So what HSML does is it functions in a sort of semiotic structure of forming the core elements, of which there are 12, that act like a language. So just like nouns and verbs and prepositions and adjectives are sufficient components with which to construct descriptions and representations of reality that predominantly is all we're using today. Like today, I'm just using magic mouth sounds to paint pictures in everyone's heads, right? And if I had it with squiggly lines, it would do nearly as well. But if I could just do what we've been able to see some whales and some dolphins do, which is actually just project an entire three-dimensional holographic representation of this particular bay and the position of all the fish, kind of like a sonar snapshot, and just send that to you 20 miles away, let you know, hey, the party's over here, here's where the fish are, guys. That might be another way to communicate. So HSML enables multiple IoT devices to do what's called sensor fusion or data fusion, even policy fusion. So you can take information from sensors, you can take information from databases, and you can take policy related information, laws or instructions or whatever, and you can fuse those together into kind of a multi-layered scene graph, which is a way of representing the information about any set of activities in any given space, all of the objects in the space, all the users in the space, all the activities in the space, all the permissions in the space. And at the end of the day, that it is intended to enable you to construct descriptions of states of things, and then describe workflows for what needs to happen. So you could conceivably program all the smart things in your house to work in a very certain particular way. One could inform another one. And this could then extend all the way out into the city and so forth, out into the world at large. So the idea of making a standard here, in many of the same ways that HTML allowed us to structure content and information on pages, HSML lets us structure context and information in spaces.
So I like that. The modeling of context is a sign of something that's sort of begun to happen, but without much organization, right? So when the web was new, it was a new location. We would visit websites, right? And we would go there, and it was all about this new world and this new place. And honestly, Web 2.0 was a lot of that too. IoT starts to get a little interesting because now there's like this Internet of Things, but the things generally exist in real life and kind of also on the internet. So they're blending now between there.
Yeah.
Of course, now we've got augmented reality and virtual reality and a lot of things that pull that together, right?
Yeah.
So when we think about all this stuff that in the real life that's sort of blending together with a digital life, that means like a proliferation of cameras and sensors and objects that we can interact with, et cetera. So this kind of means identity for everything, which is great, right? But there's some implications here. You know, the tinfoil hat wearers among us, and I occasionally wear one of a particular shape. What are the implications of all of this interconnectedness upon the privacy we have and maybe governance that can help us with that?
Yeah, so that was the question we started to ask ourselves back in 2016, which was, all of that connectedness, all of that capability, all of that monitoring was going to happen anyway. Like that was the clear thing that was happening. So then the question became, okay, can you ensure certain levels of interoperability? And you need that in order to enable governance. If things are not interoperable, you can make as many rules as you like. And it doesn't matter, right? So there's a bit of a logical cake here. Coherence is the first requirement, right? If you have coherence, then interoperability is a function of your description of coherence. What is or isn't coherent? Like if you can describe the physics of the environment and you want to say like, how do you navigate through it? You can't do it until you've done the first part, right? And then governance is a function of saying, well, what you can or cannot do are the ways that you must then navigate that environment, or who can, when, and what time, and all the parameters of activity management or activity governance. Because governance is, at the end of the day, is really about changing states in the world. It's not a theoretical function, it's a practical function, right? And so that was what we saw as being really the scariest thing I've ever noticed. It's like, oh my God. So all this cyber stuff is going to get all interconnected. You're going to end up with this internet of everything, which was like, there was no term spatial web in that sense. The GIS community had been using it for many years, but not in the sense that we saw as multi-dimensional, multimodal sort of thing. It was like, okay, this internet of everything is going to happen. there are a handful of real challenges with that, but the possibility for abuse, and looking at how wonderfully we did in Web 2.0, this was just going to cascade into, you know, essentially Black Mirror, right? That's what we're all concerned about. So it was at that time that identity became clear to me that that was a fundamental infrastructural architectural requirement. And having been in telecom before that, and looking at telemedicine services, that was when I started looking at blockchain and the idea that you might need to own these assets related to your medical history. And so I wasn't interested in crypto in the beginning. Bitcoin seemed interesting, but not enough for me to buy any or care. Blockchain looked really interesting, and this idea that you would own your sort of property. And that at that point, that was when I started looking for what kind of new identity structure, or what would become like a spatial web URL, some sort of key identifier. And that's when I came across the work that many of you on this call, you know, were pioneering before that, of course, but also like right around that time. And that was a real eye opener, and it frankly made it possible for us to focus on the other bits, because it was like, this community is completely dedicated to the identity and identifier piece. In our version of this, the human is one of those entities or one of those actors, but every single object, including conceptual objects, can have a DID in the spatial web. And all of these are sort of structured using HSML and some of these other ontology and taxonomy structures we're looking at to maintain that coherence. That then grants you this ability to do governance, which gives you the second portion of the standard, which was called HSTP, which is Hyperspace Transaction Protocol. And what that does is it basically says, okay, cool, world, give me all the information of the states of all these objects, users, actors. And again, they could be holographic objects in that space that you otherwise wouldn't be aware of. The IoT device isn't going to pick that up, but the space knows that it's there. You've sent me something to this room so I could present it on this call, as an example, and wanted it to be at this exact XYZ position, and I knew it was coming, right? Today, one of those challenges is you can send anything you want to my email address. I can't stop you. You can come to my website. I can't stop you. In fact, you can send money to my ETH wallet, and I cannot prevent that. But in the spatial web, everything is sort of permission based. And so that ability to then transport objects, users, activities, and the governance around those is described in HSML and essentially activated using HSTP, which says, what are those states? I would like the state to change this way, or if the state changes that way, you know, what is or isn't allowed in this case, in this space. And HSTP says, you know, that transaction has passed or failed. So if only Heather is allowed to enter this room, if the temperature is X and the time of day is Y, and her facial expression or other biometric information says she's in a certain state, all of which are just inputs that would be happening, you know, with any modern technology, but now could be coherently say, okay, Heather's in the right state, the door can open. And if she's not, then the door remains closed, right? So you essentially are able to program cyber physical activities and define the governance for those if you are an authority of that space. And so that is the key sort of requirement.
Right. And I think that's important, that it doesn't invent some brand new sort of types of authority, but rather gives existing authorities the ability to express the rules about what they have authority over, right? So that's right. Our house still remains our house. I posit that we'll have even more control over what's actually going on from a digital perspective than we do today.
Yes. And so you could ensure that nothing is installed in your house that doesn't meet a certain threshold of some privacy standard, or that requires some certificate. And if it doesn't have it, it can't be there, or it can't turn on, right? The city could say drones are only allowed to fly in the city in these specific flight lanes. And if they have cameras on them, those cameras are allowed to be on, but they're not allowed to, like, the drone cannot fly within 5 miles of the airport. It can't have its cameras on when it's flying over schools or certain private properties or certain zones. And all this can be spatially defined, very as if it were a video game. But now you can do it in the physical world in any digitally mediated sort of set of functions.
Right. And that's an incredibly powerful piece of this. So to switch gears just a little bit, we've talked about the blending of the digital and the real life thing, but with better technology that we've got for things like virtual reality, you can now sort of have a spatially aware virtual thing instead of a website that we're looking at as a document on a screen. We can have this. So how does this apply? How do these same concepts apply in a pure virtual space where I might be on a fictitious world rather than in real life? And what's the blend between the real and the virtual?
I love that question. So if you'll allow me to nerd out for a moment, if you've seen the original Avengers series of movies that Marvel put out, there's a moment where you get the arc of Bruce Banner and the Hulk, and it's like, you know, when he can or cannot become the Hulk, and you know, everyone's afraid he's going to do it. In the final scene of the first sort of Avengers movie, they're like, Bruce, you know, get angry, and he goes, you know, that's my trick. I'm always angry. So the parallel here is that it's actually always virtual. In one instance, it must map to the physical world. In all other instances, it doesn't need to. So Harry Potter's world or the Death Star rendered in a 3D engine somewhere can have all the exact same authorities and policies and functions that apply. Vader is allowed to apparently, you know, strangle people at the helm of of the thing, and Dumbledore, if he does something wrong, the ministry fires him for a couple weeks. He's got to go into hiding, right? So there are actually policies and things that exist in these virtual spaces. As we look at things like Decentraland and ownership and NFTs and assets and rights around this, we're going to need certain guarantees around what we can trust in these environments, how these authority structures are set up, what is transparent and what we can investigate, what we can audit. And so, you know, building property in a virtual world that you don't ultimately have ownership of, or you can't take those assets somewhere else, and the game, you know, you don't have any rights in Roblox or Fortnite. They can do whatever they want. It's a corporation. They own it. They can just change it, and change all your assets, change your skins. They can just flip the whole thing. They could sell it. They could take the company public. There's all kinds of other functions and interests at play. So you have to be able to, you don't have to, but we expect, and of course it seems natural, that we're going to want to, digital assets are becoming increasingly valuable. They're also becoming increasingly more realistic. And to that degree, at some point, even experiences themselves will be indistinguishable from reality. Our senses are not that sophisticated. And you got people like Elon and others working on Neuralink and others working on neural dust that at some point, it's not going to require any sort of, you know, ocular interface. So there is a sort of, you know, there's not just a singularity of AI, there's a singularity of reality that is a whole consideration that's coming. So having certain guarantees around these environments will become increasingly important. And this whole move towards, both with cryptocurrency, which is kind of native internet money, and now NFTs, which are really smart assets, you know, that are well, not yet. They're smart receipts to a virtual asset. I think DIDs really kind of get you all the way across the line there. And HSML, by the way, would allow you to describe the asset in such a way that it would match up. So with DIDs and HSML, I would know that the thing with all these attributes down to color, texture, size, or whatever, is that version of that thing, and not just a receipt that kind of, you know, says that I own something. It could be copied 1,000 times. Bit wandering of an answer, but hopefully that hit a couple of notes.
No, that's fantastic. So I want to draw something out a little bit. You sort of talked about how the same apply. You know, I brought up this virtual versus real thing, and you said the real is the only instance where it actually needs to line up with reality, and all these other things can exist. That sounds, you know, the metaverse has been talked about by a lot of folks, and Facebook audaciously renamed themselves to sort of try and own the space. How this is a little bit less formed of a question.
No, but let's explore.
What's the difference here between the hyperspatial web that you see and the vision of the metaverse that Facebook or other companies might be interested in offering?
Okay, great question. So I think that I'll try to provide a nuanced answer. I actually think everyone is making their best attempt to describe the same thing, which is an open and interoperable network. I think the battle right now is not for Facebook to become AOL. Everyone's seen this. We've all seen this game before. Like you don't ultimately win with a closed version of this thing. And in fact, Facebook has thrived on an open web. So it's not a requirement that they sort of close it. They're always going to have some borders, and they're going to defend those borders. I think the battle right now is who's the WordPress of the metaverse. Where are you going to go to build your sites, your stuff? Who's going to provide all the services, all the plugins, all that, right? So that it's not. And I think that even because Facebook changed their name to Meta and then said we're all about the metaverse, and they've been the least, arguably the least trustworthy brand since in the modern era since, I don't know, Exxon. That then immediately, we go towards, well, they want to keep doing the same thing and making money the same way, and that's what Meta is for. I don't actually think that. I think this is a massive pivot for the company, and that they are doomed. I talk about this in the book. I don't think that surveillance capitalism is a profitable business in 10 years. I think it's completely comes apart. Look at GDPR right now saying Google Analytics is not going to work here anymore. That's just Web 2.0 getting smashed, right? These pillars are already coming down, and I think Mark Zuckerberg has seen this coming since the day he walked in and to Lucky Palmer's and put on something that was a space and realized that he had a company about a book and said, oh, it's no longer about pages, it's about spaces. And we're just seeing the arc of that turn into Mark wants an economy. He wants to build he wants to build the largest economy with the largest amount of services to capture the most. Now, people will willingly give over their data in order to optimize and maximize all kinds of inputs and data and services around that. He doesn't have to stay in that same game. And if he doesn't get out of that game while building hardware that's capturing biometric information, the regulators are just going to keep squeezing and squeezing, and the laws and the walls are going to close in. So I don't see a way, I don't see a way out of this for surveillance capitalism centered businesses. And I think actually that they're smart enough to know that. This is why they just announced last week, hey, we're, Twitter, everyone, NFTs, we have NFTs now, right? You can take them and move things around. You can build assets, well, the asset I would like to move around is everything that you have about me. So let me NFT my data, and then I want to move it around, okay? That's what I would like. So I think that, I personally think that everyone's still pointing in the same direction. And if you're not, and you think that you're gonna be the, Prodigy and AOL, and didn't work last time, but we're gonna really give it a shot this time, and so I think everyone's smart enough not to repeat that play. But just like the oil companies and the automobile companies drag their feet as long as possible, squeezing every dollar out of something that was causing arguable harm to the world, they still need to maximize the lens that they operate on, which is fundamentally they're corporations with capital based goals. And so now, everyone wants an electric car now, but it really took someone like Elon and Tesla to just come in and change the whole game. So I think that's what's happening here, is that there's the battles for the WordPress of the spatial web or WordPress of the metaverse. No one's going to win being the siloed version of the metaverse where you don't own any of your stuff. It's going to be a wasteland.
That's a fantastic answer. So we've talked about this vision, and I think we all have a vision in our minds of what this looks like. But we see even films depict this, like Ready Player One, for example, does a really great job like laying out this universe of what it could possibly be like in the future. What's less clear is how we get from today to there. What does this rollout actually look like? Is it a cutover? Is there a gradual way we get there? What's this like?
Well, I mean, I can only guess like the rest, but the hardware is the problem. So that's why you're seeing, billions and billions of dollars being poured into that space, and more or less everyone is going there. So everyone wanted a smartphone. Does everyone remember the Facebook smartphone that came out? That lasted like an hour. So Mark was, very smart in jumping in on the VR thing when everyone thought that was just kind of whatever. And Google said, we're going to play around in the AR space. And their commitment has been like soft, two steps forward, one step back, right? And a lot of people in that community have been not happy about that. Magic Leap emerged and said, we're gonna be the new Apple of this space. And they said, well, we only need, you know, a few $1 billion. And then, oh, we spent it all because it's hardware and it's absolutely the worst possible thing to work on. And it's super hard. And so you're talking about innovation in battery life, innovation in optics, innovation in computing. And it's just, there's so many pieces, and it's kind of like that smartphone moment again, which is why Apple just takes their time and does the exact same thing they always do, waiting in the background till a lot of the froth is squeezed out and some of the core problems are solved. Then they find their own path in. They're like, we don't care about the metaverse. We're not talking about the metaverse. And they're going to come out with something different. But you're going to see 4 or 5 of these all start to really hit the market in a meaningful way. Variations on AR and VR or hybrid sort of mixed reality devices or glasses. Then there's going to be, you know, you've got Qualcomm and others that are building chips now that have so much capability in them that, you know, AI powered chips with powerful spatial computing capabilities on it. And so you're going to get 25 Chinese companies that are making, you know, essentially the Android versions of these things. So I think this is by next year, we're going to see this sort of that iPhone 1 moment. And then that's going to kick off the party. By the end of the decade, for some that can afford it, because the prices will go down, you will have those early kind of Ready Player One moments. And so, you know, halfway into the next decade, it seems like that's the dominant thing. So that's kind of the arc. And of course, one of the places we're looking at is that we always tend to look at this through the consumer market lens, but really where a lot of this is needed is in industrial spaces. And so in warehouses and ports, you know, in mining and agriculture, and even that's where the sort of holographic part of this is only one layer. Like you could think of the metaverse as sort of being the internet of experience. It's a human like interface layer of the spatial web. The Internet of Things is a machine interface, right? And so like you having an experience where you go into a store, you grab some stuff, a bunch of cameras identify you and the object and your account and your wallet, and you walk out and it just charges you and then lets you know. That's not a metaverse experience. That's you're embedded in a mesh network of the Internet of Things. But from our lens, that's still the spatial web. And if then something popped up in front of you that gave you a holographic receipt, and that was, you know, maybe that's part of the metaverse, but, or as you're walking into the environment, you're seeing information displayed on top of all of the items and, hey, you're gluten-free this week, how about 10% off that? That's a metaversal layer on top of an IoT mediated experience. And so you have to consider that component, that sort of the digitization, the physicalization of the digital and the digitization of the physical, right? These things are intersecting. And, you know, one sort of abstract point here is that that's what language is. Like the experience that a deer has of the physics of a space is almost identical. If a deer is in my living room, it can navigate that room better than I can. It understands the objects, but it doesn't know what they are. But I've embedded meaning. Oh, that's my couch, that's my TV. You know, this is a picture of my family. It can see all those things. It doesn't know what they are. So I've embedded this virtual layer of meaning into the world. All these objects have terms and functions and ideas. I know what they're supposed to do. You know, a monkey can still tell that it can sit on a couch. It understands the basic physics. It understands the gravity. It can even understand the function of a couch in that manner. But it doesn't know whether, you know, that it might be meaningful socially to me, whether it's from IKEA or it's from some fancy Italian, you know, store. But that's a social virtual layer that humans, the human monkey, has embedded into the world around us. We both configured it physically, like we shaped all this stuff, all these objects. We've also added this whole virtual layer. Now we're just doing it in a completely multidimensional way. So the sort of digital twinification is putting those data sets onto the objects and into the environment. And then we're going into those sort of imaginary spaces that we put in our brains, that we put into books, we put into pictures, we put into paintings, we put into films. Now we're just making them fully experiential. And I think that's that big shift, is moving from the information-based web to this experiential-based web, whether that's in the physical world or the digital world. Those blurred lines really create some new kind of phygital environment and phygital era. I don't have a good word for it. That is not a good word. Forget it.
It's a good start, though. So you've implied that the rollout of the spatial web is not tied to the success in the hardware of augmented reality or virtual reality hardware, meaning it can start sooner. So what is the rollout of the spatial web technologies look like, as opposed to things that are tied to a VR or AR experience?
Yeah, what a good question. So, one of the ones we just spoke about was it's really the IoT first perspective. So, in a warehouse, you've got workers that are essentially, this is a really difficult job. You spend 8 hours a day walking around, 100,000 square feet, trying to locate an item in a box. So what do? You build a map in your head. You build a three-dimensional map in your head because some things are high and some things are low and some things are on the second floor. And then you get an order on your Android phone that says, go to row 17, aisle 12, section L, and grab item XJ4-92. Okay, where am I? L, right. So you do all this three-dimensional triangulation and then you route yourself, right? And what we found is if you build a digital twin of that entire environment, and you map the inventory into every single location, every one of those bin locations in that space. So you've now embedded the information into the space. You can take that same Android phone and route that same person to that location, and the cognitive load drops in half, and they basically speed up by 30%. So the productivity and performance, and actually the mental cost, the tax, right? We think about, oh, people working hard for 8 hours, and now you're making them more productive. And that there are some societal concerns about optimizing human activity in these environments, and there's been some real concerns about how Amazon is doing it. At the same time, if you can reduce the cognitive load, that's actually the most expensive part for them. And so that's one of the functions. So you're building a three-dimensional twin, you're embedding the information into the environment, and then you're routing the human worker through that. Now, ultimately, that human worker is hands and feet, because you're no longer relying on the brain to do that much. So the ability to then have humans and robots working in that same space, or having humans in the day and robots at night, or any combination thereof, is a function of creating that shared model. And so if there's a shared model, whether it's of a city and how drones then decide, are the certain flight lanes that they have, or government policy that says in Europe, maybe the EU wants to say that the total flight height for all drones of a certain class is 120 meters. But in the Netherlands, they might want to say that it's 100, and Brussels, maybe they say it's 80, right? And as a drone passes through, it cannot ever go higher than 120, but as it goes through the Netherlands and over to Brussels, it has to go down and then down. So this is the machine's view of the spatial web. And all of those capabilities and things are necessary right now. Look at the supply chain. We had 500,000 cargo containers sitting off the coast here over Christmas. And that's because the ability for these systems to be able to communicate to each other is really poor. And our understanding of supply and demand globally is really bad. You have something like the pandemic hit, and the butterfly effect is just happening all over the place. And we're not resilient enough to be able to adapt at this scale. And so that's really what the ultimate value of something like the spatial web. It means adaptation. So it's about Internet of Experience over here on the Metaverse side. The Internet of Things, this is Industry 4.0 narratives about automation. That's really the goal. Can we use machines and algorithms to automate physical functions in the system, right? And if you did that, the impact on climate and the amount of carbon we'd be using would be hyper optimized. And we could set thresholds and regulations, and the machines could adapt and adjust to this. Instead, something like the pandemic hits, we all go to Amazon and buy everything we ever wanted to buy because we can't go anywhere. And then we just log jam, every port in the world. So this allows us to start to get a more holistic view. And the way that we start to look at the function of monitoring is not so much monitoring and surveillance, because those capabilities will be there. But if you use things like verifiable credentials, you use things like DIDs, and these get built into law and regulation, then we can have the ability, the option to share this kind of information with each other. So you can set up a relay race of adaptive supply chain. Don't send the automated truck until the thing arrives at the port, minimizing the total amount of carbon output, right? Or what have you. So this kind of adaptive thing is very much what organic systems do. This is how the body manages. You know, you got the autonomic nervous system, the autonomous nervous system. We need autonomous supply chains. And these are the kind of, you know, functions that you can have in the spatial web, which are absolutely critical, that are not about having, you know, an awesome sort of virtual experience or you know, trying to sell a JPEG for $1 million.
So you're claiming then that the world yesterday needs the spatial web, and that the visualization can currently be done maybe in a 2D factor or something like on a smartphone or other flat screens that we have. Right. And then as soon as the AR and VR get ready, it'll slide right into that, to that function for visualization.
That's right. And that's, you hit a really important point. In the warehouse, we have an application that it's multimodal. And for some people, they prefer the audio. Like when it's turn by turn instructions. Some people want to look at the map. Some people prefer to hear it. Some people want both. In our cases, a lot of the workers are Spanish. They want Spanish audio. They don't want 3D. We started with 3D holograms. People are like, this is awesome. I just need this. This is what's most useful for me. And so even this idea that, oh yeah, 3D information is better and holograms are better. And all we started doing that 4 years, and everyone was impressed, and it was faster and easier. But it hurt to wear the headset for 8 hours, and the battery would only last 3 hours. And so the hardware isn't ready on that front. But cameras and AI algorithms, computer vision is ready to go. And so that's a place where this is able to start, and it's really quite useful in some of these really critical environments that are far more relevant to our day-to-day lives, and not kind of so much in the entertainment or gaming or, you know, space. Metaverse is going to be more than that. There'll be, you know, education. We won't be doing Zooms like this. We'll all be awkwardly sitting around a very large table. But you know, but there are functions today that are super meaningful for deploying the capabilities and use of the spatial web. And this is without even getting into any of the broader needs around how DIDs can permeate, and self-sovereign identity is relevant in and of itself. Like just land title ownership, right? By the dimensions is going to end up being kind of the domains of the spatial web will essentially be boundaries. Your home is a domain, your property is a domain, the city is a domain, right? For today, we think of domains as, you know, URLs, but domains in the spatial web are spaces.
Absolutely. So you've hinted at this a little already, which is really powerful. What do governments and companies do now to prepare for the coming spatial web?
I mean, I think that there are a few groups that governments need, you know, researchers and regulators need to start becoming aware of, and predominantly that's the work that's being done around DIDs and DIDCOM, verifiable credentials, and the Spatial Web Foundation's working group at the IEEE. I think those are the kind of the critical components that you need to understand. I think that there is a more provocative branch off of this question, which is, what role do governments play in virtual worlds? So it's outside your jurisdiction, right? So what is legal or not legal, and who says and how? So thinking about your geopolitical domain is one thing. Thinking about people physically in your dimension that are experiencing something in another dimension that you have no jurisdictional power or authority over, or arguably, is a question. This ties into larger questions of governance. I mean, Minecraft, I think, is 8 times the size of Earth. That's big. That's a big space. Okay, that's one little world, right? You're talking, there'll be thousands and then hundreds of thousands. So there's 300 million websites today, right? There'll be billions and billions of these environments and spaces. At some point, AIs will just auto-generate them. Whatever experience you want, just choose your own adventure in real time based on biometric feedback. So the possibilities here are going to get really, really weird, really interesting. You know, the Chinese quote, you know, "May you live in interesting times," is sort of a double-edged sword. Well, these are interesting times, and so these are the kinds of questions. The last one I want to leave you with on this point is, you know, if Disneyland or H&M or whomever builds a store in Decentraland. Can I build a Disney store right next to the Disney store in Decentraland? And who's preventing? Are they respecting the trademark and IP agreements of the United States, or the copyright agreements that are, so we will need treaties between organizations, countries on Earth and in these virtual worlds as if they were other planets. In the same way that we had to look at these challenges when we formed the League of Nations or the United Nations. We're going to have other dimensions that we need to interact with, that have entire economies that we trade with, that the jurisdictions don't apply. And then again, who do you trust in those environments relative to what authorities? And so what prevents me from doing that in Decentraland, right? Why can't I sell Disney merch or modify it with Marvel, with Warner Brothers stuff or whatever I like? So I think this is where this sort of trust and guarantees around verifiability and credentialing of authorities becomes really critical. And if we're going to digitize all of our reality in this next age, and all this money is flowing into the space, these are the kinds of big questions that we're constantly thinking about and working on with respect to the standards.
Fantastic. We are unfortunately out of time, but this has been a great to hear your vision and thoughts around these things. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with?
Yes, I mean, I think that the role of identity is a fundamental pillar, and I think that in the arc of history, when we look at the role of property and property rights, physical property rights, I just talked about intellectual property rights, data property rights, and sort of digital asset property rights are the next challenge. This is not purely a philosophical question. This is going to come down to law. And so to the degree that we start thinking of what does digital law mean in the 21st century, and making sure that the work we're doing is addressing some of those questions or hosting some of those conversations. I'd like to see more constitutional lawyers involved in these conversations. I'd like to see, people that are really working through this sort of lens of data rights and ethics, having these dialogues around that include people with backgrounds in intellectual property and the rest of that. So that's why I think that's the next battleground is property rights with respect to the function of data and the things that data form, which become these new hyperspatial objects in this next era.
Fantastic. Gabriel, thank you for spending this time with us. We're grateful for your willingness to be here.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks for coming. I hope everyone enjoyed this conversation, and we'll look forward to seeing you all in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Gabby. Thank you, everyone, for coming.